Hello, my name is Carmen. Normally I post cross-stitching content on this channel, but today we're going to talk all about sock knitting. So I have recently decided that I am going to undertake a massive project, which is that I intend to knit all 52 pairs of socks in volume 1 of 52 Weeks of Socks by Laine. So, full disclosure, I have been knitting for 25 days. Today is the 28th of January, 2024, and I taught myself how to knit by watching many YouTube videos, and I tried for the first time on January 3rd of this year. So I have 25 days of knitting experience, which means that I'm totally ready to knit colorwork socks, right? Easy. Anyways, we're gonna start with pattern number 1, and I'll check in with you when I start knitting. Okay, so I am going to be starting with pattern number 1 in this book, intersections. So this pattern has two things that are new to me. First of all, it is a toe up sock, so I've only done cuff down, and it also has cables. So I got a special little needle that I don't know where it is right now, but I have it, and that's supposed to help me somehow. I don't know. I'm gonna have to figure that out. But let's start with the toe first, and it says here that I have to use the Turkish cast on, a figure 8 cast on, or Judy's magic cast on. And I mentioned that to my boyfriend, and he said to me, "You're gonna do Judy's magic cast on though, right? Because that sounds like the most fun." Anyways, I'm gonna have to figure that out. But luckily, there's plenty of YouTube tutorials for that. So that's what I'm gonna do. And the yarn I'm gonna use is Filcolana Arvetta by Filcolana in the color, I believe on the website it was called Red Squirrel. It says here color 352, if that means anything to anybody. Anyways, so I think those will be really pretty, and we're gonna get started. Alright, so I'm checking out
In this video, I'm going to show you how to
a tutorial by Very Pink Knits.
This cast on was brought to us by Judy Becker. I think she invented it. It was
Oh,
first
okay,
shown to
Judy
the
Becker
world on
invented it.
knitting.com.
So that answers that question.
I'm going to
So I'm gonna use the Devious Knitters tutorial. She does it in a slightly different way, and I mean, sometimes you just need several people to explain something to you before it makes sense, or you just need to see it from a different angle, and this version seems to be working for me.
Needles pointing all the way past
Okay,
the
I
yarn,
think I got this.
wrapping and bringing it between the needles. Now pivoting the needles toward me so that we have the same number of stitches on each needle.
Now I knit. Oh my goodness, there's so much tension in my body right now. Okay, then you just knit.
Check my website, deviousknitter.com.
Okay. Give my tail a little tug. I think I did it. Look at that. I cast on. I now have access to Judy's magic. Yay! Okay, now I can do the fun stuff. Okay, so I finished my toe. I was a little confused because it said to knit it to 2 inches or to the point where it's just below your pinky toe. And I couldn't tell if it was like choose one or the other or whichever comes first. I think it was whichever comes first. So that's what I did. So now I'm actually gonna do a cable for the first time. And right off, I'd like to send a public thank you to Knitting with Susan Bryan, who taught me how to read a cable pattern because I didn't know how to do that, and also to Nimble Needles, who has a tutorial on just like how to do cabling. And I've watched a lot of his videos. He's so sweet. He sounds like such a nice man, and he has so many good tutorials out. But anyways, now is kind of the scary part because now I actually have to do the new thing. We're gonna try, and the first one that I have to do is a right leading needle, which means I have to have the cable in the back. We're gonna do this. Okay, so I just knit a few stitches. Now is the scary part because I have to slip some stitches. I mean, slipping stitches is not scary, right? I just 1 and 2, I just let them hang like that. So, okay, knit these two, give it a little tug like Norman said, and then I have to slip them back on 1 and 2. So apparently you can do this without this needle, but that sounds scary. So I'm not gonna do that, not today anyways. I mean, right now it just kind of looks like a blob, but I guess I just need to like do more of them. I don't know. And last one. 1, 2, okay. Hey, you know what? Those are leaning to the right. What do you know? I'm gonna keep knitting, and once I have a few more rows in, I'm guessing it'll look a little bit better. Okay, so I've done an entire pattern repeat on my sock, plus a couple of rows so that the last row of cabling can be clear. And you know what? I think this is easier than knitting lace. So it's always like such a good feeling when you learn something new and you're able to do it. Anyways, so I think that this sock is going to be no problem at all. I'm curious to see how like the heel turn and everything works going the other way around, but I imagine it's not too bad, and the instructions seem to be fairly clear, so I'm not too worried about that. What I am worried about is whether or not I'm gonna be able to knit these during my lunch break at work with all the distractions. That's kind of something about sock knitting that I really like, is that it's easy to bring around with you, but with some of these patterns, they're quite involved. So I don't know that I will want to bring them out of the house in an environment where I can mess up, and maybe I only have a certain number of minutes and I don't have time to fix a mistake if I make one. So I think these will be okay on my lunch break tomorrow. However, looking forward in the book, the next pattern, I think it's called Avena, those socks scare me. They look really complicated and hard. So those socks might not get brought to work during my lunch breaks. I'm just saying. Those ones, well, you know what? I'm just gonna focus on these for now, and I think it'll be fine. So yes, I can knit these socks during my lunch break. They're not that difficult. And it's going so well. Look at these cables. I like this sock. It's going great. So today is day 3 of knitting the intersection sock, and this is how far I've gone. So I finished the foot completely, as well as the like gusset increases. And now I have to turn the heel. So I've never done a heel turn like this. I've only done a reinforced heel where you like pick up the stitches after knitting the heel flap. So this will be different. However, it looks exactly like, pretty much exactly like the heel turns that I've done already. So I don't think it's going to be too difficult. Okay, so I have just finished turning the heel, and yeah, I've basically knit this kind of thing before. It's just when I've done it in the past, this little triangle shaped thing was at the bottom of the foot rather than in the back of the heel. So same idea, I guess. Here she is, and I tried it on. I was worried it would be too big because I've had a bunch of my socks so far be a little bit too big, but it seems perfect. It seems perfect. I am very hopeful that this is going to be a perfectly fitting sock. All right, time to get to work on the leg and cuff. So this is a very exciting moment because I have just finished knitting my first sock. I just need to bind off, which I've never done before, so that'll be fun. But yeah, today is day 4 of knitting this sock. I almost managed to finish it last night. I just had a bit of the cuff left, but it was bedtime and I needed to be responsible, so I left the last couple of rows for today, but now it is time to bind off. And I'm actually not gonna watch a YouTube video for this. I'm just gonna follow the directions here because they're written out. Knit through the back loop, pull it out, ooh, nice and loose, and boom. Okay, got one stitch off of there. Now I just gotta do this 63 more times and we'll be done. I'm at my last bind off stitch, and it says to repeat it until there's one stitch remaining, but then it doesn't tell you what to do with that last stitch. But I think you're just supposed to like cut the yarn and pull it through and you're done. I don't know how I feel about that. Should I like connect it? Cause see how it's kind of like there's this step. Also, this is like, I think it's too loose. Is it too loose? I don't know. Oh, I don't know how to end this. I'm not gonna lie, I don't love how this bind off looks. I think it looks really rough. Okay, so good news and bad news. Good news is I finished the sock and I wove in the ends. However, I have not trimmed off the excess yarn at the cuff because I'm not really happy with this bind off. So I did figure out a way to like get rid of that little ladder, that little step, thanks to a tutorial by the Jili dog. And basically, you can see it here even on the blocker. When I try the sock on, it's snug around the front of my leg, but it's like, it's so loose in the back that it's even like rippling out like this in the back of my foot, and I don't really like that. So I don't really know how to go back and fix that. I am gonna just go ahead and cast on the next sock and refrain from trimming this off, and maybe I'll just learn to live with it, or maybe I will figure out a way to fix it because it does kind of bother me. Okay, so I lied. I did not cast on the second sock. It was really bugging me, so I went back and I painstakingly pulled out my cast off, which I do not recommend, by the way. That took forever. And then I watched the Jili dog's elastic bind off video again, and that's what this kind of bind off is, an elastic bind off. But the way that they explained it was that when you're over the purl stitches and you're ribbing, you do a purl instead of a knit. Anyways, I don't really know how to explain it, and that definitely smoothed it out a lot. And I also made it a lot tighter than the first time, as tight as I could, honestly. And it's still kind of loose. I mean, with blocking, it might even out. But at this point, with the tension that I have here, it does fit. It looks fine on my foot. It's not like there's no rippling, there's no extra fabric anymore. So it's not perfect, but it is a huge improvement. And I, weaved in the end, and I even snipped it. So there's no turning back now. This sock is officially finished. I'm gonna take a little breather, and then I will cast on the second sock, but I need to like not look at socks for a second. By the way, from the beginning of my bind off the first time until now, 2.5 hours. It took me 2.5 hours to bind off. Oh my God. Anyways, now I know how to do it. It's all a learning experience. It will not take me as long next time, I'm sure. And overall, I'm very happy with this sock. I just need to not look at it for a minute. So before I call it a day, I just wanted to document how silly this ball of yarn looks when it's, 3/4 of the way done. It's so floppy. It's like a wiener. I keep thinking it looks like a cartoon cigar, like a fake cigar, but also, sorry. Okay, so great news. I have finished the first pair of socks in 52 weeks of socks. These are the intersection socks, and I actually realized that I never mentioned this when I started filming, that I never actually told you who the designer is. So let me do that right now. The designer is Marceline Smith. And Marceline, you killed it. I love these socks. I think they're not that difficult, even for a beginner and somebody who's never done cabling. They're really pretty and they fit great, and I don't really have a lot of notes. But I did decide that I was going to kind of rate all of my socks in a few different categories. So first of all, the difficulty rating. I would give these socks a 3 out of 10 in difficulty, but quite honestly, I think that it would be more like a 2 or a 1 out of 10 for most people. Really, the only reason it's a 3 out of 10 for me is because I'd never done toe up, I'd never increased, I'd never done cabling, I'd never cast off. So, you know, there was a lot of new stuff for me that took a little bit of time to figure out, and there were a couple of mistakes along the way. So for me, it was a 3 out of 10, but if you're an experienced sock knitter, it's really, these are not difficult socks. There are more difficult socks to come in this book. So that's my rating. What did I learn? I learned a lot doing these socks. I learned how to start a sock from the toe. So yes, I learned Judy's magic cast on, which is truly magic. It is completely invisible. It's hard to believe that I started it down here. I learned how to cable. I also learned that along the way in my second sock, I learned that I don't have to transfer the stitches from the cable needle back onto the knitting needle. I can knit directly off of the cable needle, and actually that saved me a lot of time and made things a lot easier because I found that I was splitting my yarn when I was doing it the other way. Anyway, so I did eventually figure that out. That's another thing I learned. I also learned that cabling is not as stretchy as just plain stocking stitch. So that's something to keep in mind for the future. Luckily, it's not stiff enough to the point where I can't get it over my foot, so it's not a problem, but just something for me to keep in mind in the future when I do cabling. I learned how to increase, which is like a very basic knitting technique, but I just hadn't needed to do that before, so I learned how to do that now. I have that, you know, basic knowledge under my belt. I learned how to do a different kind of heel. I'm pretty sure that this is a Flegel heel. I could be wrong on that, but when I Google image search Flegel heel, they look just like this. So I'm gonna say that this is a Flegel heel, and I learned how to do a Flegel heel. And lastly, I learned how to cast off. And as you will have noticed, I was not a fan of casting off. In fact, casting off was the hardest part of this sock knitting experience for me. I also learned that blocking can save a sock. So what I learned about this cast off is that it is normal that it flares out. I don't love that, but once it's on my foot, it really, you don't notice it. It's fine. So I'll quit being such a baby. I learned how to cast off. I also learned the importance of blocking, and that's pretty much what I learned from knitting this sock. Another thing I'd like to keep track of is how long it took me to knit each pair of socks. This pair of socks took me 6 days to knit, 4 days for the first sock and 2 days for the second sock. Another thing that I want to take note of for all of these sock patterns is whether or not it is what I am calling lunch break appropriate. So something I like about sock knitting is that since it is such a small item, you can very easily bring it with you on your outings or whatever. However, there are certainly plenty of sock patterns in here that I will not want to do that for, especially some of the more difficult ones, because when I'm out on my lunch break, there's, you know, music in the cafe I'm sitting at, there's people around, somebody might stop and ask me what I'm doing, so there are distractions. And so some of the more complicated patterns, I might not want to bring them on my lunch break. So that is one of the characteristics that I will be rating these socks on. But as for these socks, yes, these are absolutely lunch break appropriate, easy to bring around, not complicated enough to where I'm getting too distracted and making a bunch of silly mistakes. Actually, I found that I made more mistakes when I was knitting right here than when I actually brought it out of the house with me. So that's interesting, I guess. Another question that I want to ask about all of these socks is, would I knit it again? And the answer is absolutely yes. I would love to knit these again. I think these are very pretty, not very difficult, and I can't wait to wear them and show them off to everybody in my life. I would, however, do a couple of things differently. First of all, if I were knitting it, in the way that the directions indicate, I would change to a smaller needle size for the cuff. I actually considered sizing down for the second sock, but I wanted them to match, so I decided not to. So that's the first thing I would change. But actually, I think if I were to knit these again, I would just knit them cuff down. This pattern does not require you to knit them toe up. I'm glad I learned that skill, but it's not a necessity, and I think these socks would work just fine cuff down. I don't know how to do this heel cuff down, but I could just do my regular heel flap and gusset. So that's all really I would change. Oh, I would also change the yarn. And I love this yarn, Filcolana Arvetta, in the color Red Squirrel. I love this yarn. I love the color. There's really nothing against the yarn. It's just that it is a somewhat fine superwash, and I feel like with cabling, you want something with a bit more structure to really highlight the texture of a cable, and they do kind of flatten out a little bit with this yarn. It's a minor thing, but I have absolutely no problem with the way that these socks are as they are right now. So my overall rating for these socks is a great 9 out of 10, and the only reason I'm not giving it a 10 out of 10 is that I hated casting off. I hated it so much, but everything else about this sock was an absolute pleasure. I love them. I can't wait to wear them. And now that they're done, we're gonna move on to sock number 2 in 52 weeks of socks. So I've just gotten home from a couple of concerts. It's 11 p.m., but whenever I get home from concerts, it takes me a while to feel like I need to go to bed, like I'm still kind of wired from performing. So what better time to start what looks to be one of the more difficult sock patterns in this book. So this is Avena, the second pattern in 52 weeks of socks. The designer is Natalia Vasilieva. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but they are beautiful, but they also look very complicated. There are 3 full pages of instructions here and a lot of acronyms that I am not familiar with, so this will be fun. And I have been spending some time on Ravelry looking at everybody else's project notes just to get an idea of what the experience was like for some other people, and a lot of people have commented on the difficulty of this sock. So I'm a little bit worried because I'm not an experienced knitter. I've been knitting for, you know what? I think tomorrow will be 1 full month. Yay! Anyways, I've decided to knit this in Socks Yeah by Coop Knits. I've heard some nice things about this yarn. The color is quartz, and I have 2 cakes of this. These are 50 grams. This starts with a different kind of cast on than what I have ever done. So it says double chain methods are recommended, and then it gives you some instructions. And I do not understand these instructions. Before filming this, I was struggling to try and follow what is written in here, and it doesn't seem to make sense. There's also like just some grammatical mistakes. Well, not really grammatical mistakes, but just like an editing error. Like there's a page turn partway through a sentence, and the sentence says, join in the round, being careful not to twist the stitches and pass the in the round, being careful not to twist. Like there's just like some errors in here, which makes me think that maybe the instructions themselves also are not quite correct. Or maybe there's just some assumed knowledge that I don't have. But anyways, I just went on YouTube and I looked up double chain method of casting on. I have this crochet hook, which you're supposed to use. I have never crocheted before. And anyways, I have a tutorial here by Jocelyn Peters of Mountain Song Designs, and I think I get it. Hey, so I'm just doing a little voiceover to save you all of the trouble. Basically, this is it's a cast on that you need to be able to have some basic knowledge of crochet for, and I don't. So I figured it out eventually, and you know, it was a little tough, but we got there, and it is very pretty. You will see in a second. Okay, no, that didn't work. I'm gonna start over. No, oh no. Okay, I'm gonna stop filming. Okay, great news. The moment I stopped filming, I got it. I guess I just had some performance anxiety. And I actually, as difficult as it was for me to figure it out, I really like this as a cast on because it's so pretty. It creates this kind of braided cord thing. And you know, not that I usually have done a German twisted cast on. It doesn't look bad, but it just kind of looks like nothing. It sort of disappears. But this is so pretty, and for how beautiful and intricate these socks are, I definitely think that this was worth it. Anyways, I am going to just start the rib. I need something a little bit easy now to knit on after struggling with this cast on. But I'm really gonna get started on the sock tomorrow. It's almost midnight now, so it's bedtime. I can go to bed. Okay, so I have completed my cuff as well as the first 4 rows of the stitch pattern. So this is the first sort of interesting row, and it starts with a couple of regular stitches, so I'm gonna do that right now. Okay, so off camera, I have just managed to do the first dip stitch back. It looks like this. I needed to use the crochet hook for it because every time I tried to do it with the needle, I was dropping stitches. And I have a really hard time with the crochet hook because I feel like I need a third hand, but I guess I just need to, you know, work on my dexterity and eventually I will get it. But for now, I'm just gonna keep going because I have to do this throughout the whole row. So we're gonna try this again. Oops, just dropped my crochet hook. That's exactly what I meant. Okay, so I grab this and then I pull it through to the front and then I put it on my needle. Okay, tension it and then knit one. Okay, and then I do it again. Ooh. And onto the needle, tension, and there you go. It seems like it's kind of making like little eyelets through the hole that it came through, but maybe that'll all kind of sort itself out. I don't know. We're gonna see, but you know, this is actually not as hard as I feared it would be. At least for now, we are not that far into the sock, so I don't want to speak too soon, but right now I'm feeling kind of optimistic and it's already looking beautiful, so I'm pretty happy. So I've just finished the first row of this dip stitch pattern. The columns of twisted rib or the twisted knit stitches are kind of veering off to the side. I think I did it correctly. Maybe that's supposed to happen. We will see. I'm gonna keep going and we will see. But right now, I think this is super pretty. I am into this. Hello, so it is day 2 of knitting the Avena sock, and this is where I'm at. I have just finished the leg. I did like 8 pattern repeats. Well, it's like 8 half pattern repeats. Anyways, this is the length I like. And also they warn you that this pattern uses more yarn than you might expect. So I don't want to make the leg too long because I don't want to run out of yarn. Anyways, I have a lot of thoughts and concerns about this pattern, but I'm going to start with the good things because there's definitely a lot that I like about it too. First of all, dip stitches, love them. I love how they look. I don't find them to be that difficult. They do slow me down, which is to be expected. I've been using a crochet hook and I haven't had any problem with that. Secondly, I really like this yarn. I have found, compared to the other superwash yarns that I've used so far, that this has a bit more tooth to it. And the third and most important thing that I like about this is that this sock is so pretty. I love this stitch pattern. I love it so much. I can't help but wonder, like, what would a sweater with this going down the entire sleeve look like? It's so pretty, and it kind of leads me to my concerns with this pattern, because if this sock were not as gorgeous as it were, I don't know if I would have the patience to deal with this pattern. So I must preface this with a reminder that I am a new knitter and I don't have a ton of experience reading patterns. So a lot of this might come down to just me and my own shortcomings. But this pattern is extremely difficult for me to follow, and I have read a lot of the notes on project pages on Ravelry of people who've tried to knit this sock. Tried being a key word, because a lot of people did not finish. And I think a lot of people are having a lot of the same struggles that I have, particularly when it comes to the leg gusset heel area, which is where I am right now in the pattern. And a few people have mentioned that they worry that there might be some like translation errors, which I found really interesting. I have one video that I found on YouTube by Mira's Knits where she talks about this pattern, and she has the pattern in German, and she was saying that there might be some translation errors or just some shortcomings in that sense. There was somebody on Ravelry who wrote their comments in French, which I speak, so I was reading the French comments as well, and that person was also saying that there were probably some translation errors. And the thing is, for me, when I read this, I also feel like, is this a translation? Like, because some of the sentences just like don't really work, and sometimes they're a little bit redundant, or sometimes it feels like different things are being explained referring to the same thing. Like, it's not structured in a way that makes sense to me. And I have found at least one like confirmed mistake in this pattern. When they're talking about the leg gusset, they're talking about something that aligns with rounds 5 or 10 of the main pattern respectively. And that's wrong. It's rounds 4 and 10. So that's like kind of a big concern for me, because now when I look at this pattern that already confuses me, I'm doubting myself even more, because it's like, well, I don't know if this is just my own shortcoming that's making me not really understand this right off the bat, or if it's just like a mistake. I think at least half of my time working on the sock has just been me staring at the pattern, reading it, trying to understand it. I even like on my notes app on my phone was trying to like rewrite it in wording that made more sense to me. Also, something of note is that on the Ravelry page, you see all these pictures of other people's projects, and so many people changed the heel because their heel construction, the way that it's written out here, is just like so confusing. Anyways, but I would really like to attempt to knit the sock as it is explained in the pattern, because it's so pretty, and I just want to learn how to do this. So that's what I'm going to try to do. And if I make mistakes, well, at least I have a second sock to get it right, right? I get 2 tries. So I'm gonna get on with that. Okay, so it is many hours later, and I have finally finished the gusset and heel of the Avena sock. And oh my goodness, what a slog. I did figure it out. I have put a lot of post-it notes in here to like denote what I think are either errors or just things where I personally needed a bit more clarity. I don't know if I did it completely according to the pattern, but I think this looks really good. I think it fits the pattern. So the increases happen in the middle of the back of the leg and they kind of branch out. It's really very pretty. Anyway, so now I'm gonna move on to the heel turn, but it's quite late, so I might actually just call it a day. However, I do want to just knit something easy. I hope the next sock is a little easier because this is really pushing the limits of what I am capable of doing. Okay, so it is the end of day 3 of knitting this sock, and I've got to say that today's knitting experience was much nicer than yesterday's. I did the heel turn. I had started it last night, but really I did it, the most of it, today. I decided to do the shaping, what is it, the foot shaping, arch shaping, and it really wasn't very hard. Also, all of the heel turn is reinforced stitching, which I'm happy about because for a sock that requires this much effort, I would want it to last. So I think I have maybe like 4 more pattern repeats on the foot to do, and then I will move on to the toe, and then I'll be done. So I don't think I'll finish it today, but I think I will probably finish it tomorrow. And I was hoping to be able to finish it tomorrow because the day after tomorrow, I have a 2-hour gap in my schedule at work, and it would be really cool to be able to knit during that time. But the only part of this pattern that I feel comfortable taking out of the house is the cuff and leg. So I would like to be done this and just have like cast on the second sock. You know, I'm not necessarily super looking forward to knitting the second sock. I think that by the time I finish this one, it's gonna be like, finally over. But this is such a pretty pair of socks. It'll be really fun to see it completely finished. There's a different kind of toe to this from what I've ever done. There's no Kitchener stitching from what I can tell. You kind of just decrease much more gradually. And then I think you end up with like maybe like a little pinhole at the top of the toe. I'm not totally sure yet. We'll see once I get there. Just finish this row, this round, and then I will check in when I'm done. And as you can see here, I did manage to finish my first sock in time so that I could knit during my 2-hour break. I have finally finished the Avena socks, and oh my goodness, this pair of socks almost destroyed me. These were so difficult for me. They're very pretty. I'm happy with the final product, but oh my goodness, these were not beginner friendly for sure. The Avena sock was designed by Natalia Vasilieva, and its main, distinctive feature are these beautiful dip stitches. And when I originally looked at the pattern, I thought that that would be the part that's difficult, but actually that's not that difficult at all. The overall difficulty rating that I would give this is 8 out of 10, so quite difficult. I am a beginner knitter and a beginner sock knitter, and so maybe if I were a bit more experienced, it wouldn't have been as difficult for me. However, looking through the Ravelry notes, I think the average difficulty rating that people gave it there is like 7 out of 10, so I'm not the only person who had a hard time with this. And the way the pattern is written is quite confusing for me, I find. And I'm just gonna tell you right now all of the edits, I guess, that I made to the pattern, or the mistakes. I don't know if they're really mistakes. There were definitely some formatting errors here, like random dashes through the middle of words. Also, the way that it's written is sometimes a little bit redundant. The first thing that I really needed help with was the cast on. I don't know if this is just a me thing, but I needed to just go on YouTube and search double chain method cast on and follow a YouTube video, because the way that it was described here, I couldn't understand it. Another thing that kind of took me a long time to understand just by reading the pattern is that the increases at the gusset happen in the middle of the back of the leg. And actually, I went through Ravelry and I went through everybody's projects and tried to find pictures where people actually showed the back of the heel which is hard to show. It's hard to photograph the back of your heel as you're wearing a sock. So there weren't a lot of pictures that I could find, but here. For anybody in the future who wants to know what that looks like, this is it here. The increases happen in the middle of the back of the leg. So that's the first like clarification. The first for sure error that I found was in the leg gusset part. There's like a little paragraph where they describe what's about to happen. And there they say that you may need to replace the corresponding outermost knit 1 through the back loop of the gusset with DSB or DSF on rounds aligned with rounds 5 or 10 of the main pattern respectively. That's wrong. It's corresponding with the rounds 4 and 10 of the main pattern respectively. So that was the moment where I was like, that's definitely a mistake. What else might be wrong in here? Another thing that I think might be a mistake, but maybe I'm just reading it wrong. It's also in the leg gusset area in round 2, aligned with round 2. It says knit 3 through the back loop. And this is so like there's an increase round and then there's just a knit round, increase, knit round, pretty standard. And so this is one of the knit rounds. And knit 3 through the back loop is a decrease by 2. You're not supposed to decrease. You're just knitting through the back loop 3 times. And then another thing on that same round is that your middle of round, your beginning of round, ends up being the middle of those 3 stitches. So you will need to move your stitch marker over by 1 in the second round when you're knitting through the back loop 3 times. So the middle of those 3 stitches becomes the new beginning of round. That is not really explained in here. I was able to figure it out just through pictures because the way that the increases happen makes it so that like the pattern is sort of branching out. So yeah, that middle stitch is the middle branch. I think that's it for like my corrections. I found the really complicated part was the leg gusset area. Once I got to the heel turn and the foot and the toe and everything, it was pretty smooth sailing after that point. And actually I really like the bottom of the foot, as you can see here. Well, I'll show you a side view of it. So on the blockers, it has this, and then also if I can just flatten this out and show you the other way around. I thought that this was just because it was pretty, but it actually really does alter the shape of the sock. And I will say that when I'm wearing it, it feels quite nice because the bottom of my foot is getting hugged. So actually, if there's one thing from this pattern that I'm taking away that I may want to recreate in another sock, it would be the bottom of the foot. What I learned a double chain cast on method. I learned how to do dip stitches, which I thought would be really difficult, but weren't. I actually really enjoyed doing them. They did slow me down, but I think the effect is really beautiful and it's really not that difficult at all. I also understood continuing in pattern because sometimes it would say just continue in pattern, but the pattern had changed. And also it's a little bit open-ended because they let you choose your own order of the sequence. I learned how to just like continue in sequence and not have to rely on everything being spelled out for me word for word. So actually I think that this sock or these socks made me a better knitter. Is it lunch break appropriate? I would say for the most part, no. It is a pretty easy sequence to memorize once you've done it a couple of times, but for the increases at the gusset, it got a little bit too complicated, I think, for that. It took me 7 days to knit this pair of socks. The first sock took me 4 days and the second sock took me 3 days. However, I would like to stress that those 3 days for the second sock were work days, and I actually, like, I didn't knit the second sock 25% faster. I knit it at least 50% faster because those were days where I actually had a lot less time to knit. But it went so much faster because I had spent so much time understanding the pattern on the first sock. So for context, that first sock was done over 4 days. 2 of those days were half work days and the other 2 days were days that I had completely off. And on those days that were off, I spent more than half of my knitting time, not actually knitting, but just like staring at this pattern and going through Ravelry and trying to understand it and knitting something and then picking it out. So there was so much time spent on that first sock, just like decoding the pattern. And then the second sock went so much faster because I'd already figured it out. I did knit them in mirror image. I don't know that it's really very visible because it's such a busy pattern anyways, but yeah, I did do the opposite in the sequence. Would I knit this sock again? I would say probably not. Immediately after I finished, I thought I could do this again, but full transparency, I have actually started the next sock as I am recording this, and I'm just noticing with the next sock like how much easier it is and how much more I'm enjoying it because the pattern is written in a way that makes a lot more sense for me. And so now, you know, a couple days later, revisiting this sock, I'm like, I don't have any desire to do this again. This was so hard for me. And maybe in a few years when I have a lot more experience and I'm a lot more comfortable with this, it wouldn't feel as daunting and I would want to revisit this pattern. But for now, no, I don't really want to put myself through that again. And it took a really long time. It's worth it because the sock is so pretty, but is it worth the effort? At my own current level of skill with knitting, I would say no, I would not do this again. So my overall rating of these socks, the Avena socks, I would give these a 5 out of 10, which I feel kind of bad saying. I would say that what this sock has going for it is how pretty they are, and I also really like the bottom of the foot. I think it's not only pretty, but it's quite comfortable, and I would recreate that again. But the difficulty of it for me and the amount of time it took me to make it is what knocks down that rating. So 5 out of 10, sorry. But anyways, I'm very glad that these socks are finished. I'm very proud of myself for having completed this pair of socks. I think I am a better knitter now. So that's like a big positive aspect of having knit these. But if I'm honest, I'm very glad that they're done with so that I can get on to some more relaxing knitting experiences. So the next sock in 52 Weeks of Socks is Jili. And if I can be completely honest, with this particular sock, when I first saw pictures of it, I wasn't that interested in it. There are definitely different socks in this book that appealed to me more. But the more I've looked at it, the more I find it kind of cool. And I'm just excited to be knitting a new pair of socks because that last pair kind of took it out of me. So this pair is knit with 3.25 millimeter needles, which should be fun because I have only knit on 2.5 millimeter needles so far. And the yarn that I have chosen is this one. This one comes from a farm that is like a 20 or 30 minute drive for me, which I think is really cool. From a farm called Les Brebis du Beau Rivage. So it's local and it's undyed. In hindsight, I kind of wish I'd gotten the gray undyed version, but this will be fine. It is a fingering weight. There's nylon in here. It's very rough. It's single ply. And I am a little worried that it might like break, but I'm gonna try to be gentle with it. I've knit a couple of swatches. It is definitely a different experience knitting with it. And it's also different experience knitting with these, but I'm curious to see how it goes. And looking at this pattern, it starts with a long tail tubular cast on, which I'm really excited to try because I find that these tubular cast ons that I keep seeing online look really cool. And it's knit top down, so cuff down. And I was just looking at the pattern and I thought, oh, that's so weird. They put the instructions for the heel after the toe, and then I realized, oh, this is an afterthought heel. So I'm going to be doing an afterthought heel as well. So those are kind of the two new big techniques that I'm going to be learning here. But overall, I'm really excited to knit this. I hope that the stitch pattern shows up in this yarn. We will see. I will be knitting the larger size because I did a swatch and that sort of seems to be the size that will work better for me. And I also have been looking at the Ravelry project notes from other people's projects, and a lot of people have commented that they wish they had knit the larger size. So maybe this is a pattern that tends to run a little small. I will be knitting the larger size, and with that, let's get started. So I have just finished my cast on. So maybe you can see it there, but maybe you can't because this yarn is so irregular and so spindly and fuzzy that you kind of can't see anything. It just looks like a bunch of fuzz. But if I really do look at it, yes, I do think that I have done a tubular cast on. And I found the video by Pearl Soho to be the most helpful, and I kind of supplemented with a video from Irina Revo, Knitting and Crochet, to help me join in the round, and also she explains how to get rid of the jog, but I'll need to establish a bit more fabric before I can do that. And now it's just time to start working on the leg, and there are a couple of new increases that I've never done. Make one left backwards loop as well as make one right backwards loop. Not totally sure how that works, but I watched a couple of videos and I think I'm gonna get it. And nothing in the near future looks too difficult, so I am very positive and hopeful about this one. So last night I finished the leg of this sock. Okay, so I've just revisited the last sock. I've just filmed that segment where I talk about the last sock, and I'm realizing like how much I'm enjoying this new pair of socks, which, by the way, I realized I once again forgot to tell you who the designer is. It's Ainur Berkimbayeva. This is the Jili sock. I'm really enjoying this wool. I was worried that the stitch pattern wouldn't show up on it, but it does. And funny story, so I was warned of this when I bought this wool, but I came across my first knot. And the lady at the store said that I should take that knot out and join it in a more secure way. So I decided to do a spit splice. I don't actually use my spit because I think that's kind of gross. I used water. And then I went to knit and I realized that my working yarn was still just a couple inches long, and I realized that I had accidentally joined it to the tail. So that's, you know, a little idiot moment of mine, but it was fine. And also another note about this yarn is that I did goof up and I had to unpick a couple of rounds, and just from having knit, it was already felting together. Like, this is such a spiny, like sticky yarn. It really wants to stick to itself. So I think these socks are definitely gonna felt, but I kind of like that because I feel like this is a very rustic pattern. This is a very rustic yarn. Even though it's a fingering weight and I'm knitting with 3.25mm needles, it's like very voluminous because of the nature of how it's spun. So I think this was actually like the perfect choice of yarn for this sock. So I've finished the leg and now I'm gonna go on to the foot, which feels really weird. Like, I feel like I should be doing a heel right now, but it's an afterthought heel, so I guess I'll deal with that later. But yeah, I'm excited to keep going. Oh, one thing I wanted to note, and I noticed this on Ravelry, a few people mentioned this, is that the knitting pattern is like, it's a little bit hard to memorize the pattern. It's like a 4-row sequence and it's just hard to memorize. And the way that it's written, it's like printed out in these columns and it's really easy to lose your spot. So I did something, I'm just gonna flash this really quick, where I just like boop, wrote it out in one single line, and I put a little red line every time I'm supposed to move a stitch marker, which I soon removed because I've realized that I hate stitch markers. When I use stitch markers, there's like a 30% chance I'm dropping stitches. I find them so cumbersome, and I'd rather just read my knitting than have to move stitch markers all the time, because this, I think it calls for like 8 stitch markers. So I am currently using 0. But still, I instead of writing out move the marker, I just put the little red line. And I found this a lot easier to follow than the pattern. And I might have to do another one of these little cheat sheets for the next sections. We'll see. I haven't spent too much time analyzing the rest of the knitting pattern yet. But anyways, so far, I'm having a great time, especially when I compare it to my experience with the last sock. But we're not going to think about that sock anymore. It's behind me. Right now, it's Jili time. Okay, so I have reached a very exciting point in this sock. I have, well, it feels like I've finished because I just Kitchener stitched the toe, but now I have to go and do the heel, and you'll notice that I put a lifeline in here right before I started decreasing for the toe, because it's kind of hard to know how long to knit the length of the foot when there's no heel. Usually every other pair of sock I've worked on, I was able to try it on as I went, but with this, I mean, I can put this over my foot, but it's just hard to tell without a heel there. So I figured if I got it wrong, I technically made it a tiny bit shorter than the second size in the pattern, but I had the feeling that it would be too long. So I did it about a centimeter or like a half an inch shorter than what it called for. So hopefully it's okay, but if not, that's what the lifeline is for. And now I'm going to refresh with a few YouTube videos on how to pick up these stitches after I pull the lifeline out, or maybe I pick them up before I pull them out. I don't know, we'll see once I do my review. And hopefully I'll have this sock done by the end of the day. Yeah. So I'm currently working on sock number 2. The afterthought heel went fine on the first sock. I'll give my final thoughts on that when I'm done both socks. But something that has occurred to me is that these last 2 pairs of socks have been very twisted rib heavy. They basically have twisted rib going all the way down the cuff and through the instep. And I have found that I've gotten much faster at knitting twisted rib now. You know, this speed of knitting might not be fast to some people, but to me, I feel like I'm just whizzing my way through this now. It's fun, you get into rhythm and you start to get faster, which is great news because that means I can get on to the next pair of socks sooner. And the next pair I'm quite excited for. So I have just finished the Jili socks. As you can probably tell, one sock is blocked and the other one is not. I literally finished this maybe 10 minutes ago. And there's a significant size difference between the blocked and the unblocked sock. I'm hoping that once I block this one, it'll grow a little bit to match the other one. However, this one kind of fits me better, so I'll get into that. So just as a reminder, the Jili sock, here it is. It was designed by Ainur Berkimbayeva. It is a cuff down design with an afterthought heel, so that was a first for me. And I was surprised by these socks. When I first saw the pattern, I was kind of meh on them, but I really enjoyed knitting them. The yarn was different than anything that I've used before, but in the end it wasn't that difficult. I did run into a few knots, but that's fine. And actually I realized that I still have more than 50 grams of that yarn left, and then I weighed these and it's actually a 115 gram ball, so that's cool. I get extra yarn. So the Jili socks, I would give it a 3 out of 10 in difficulty. It wasn't very difficult at all. There were a couple of new techniques that I learned, like the tubular cast on, which is definitely something that I want to do again. It's not that difficult once you get the hang of it, and it looks really professional. I mean, this is a very like rustic yarn, so you almost kind of can't tell, but if you really look at it, it does look very professional as a starting point for this sock. And the other new thing that I learned was the forethought heel, which is something that I never done before. And to be quite honest, I just don't really understand the point of it. Like, I guess if you're using a self-striping yarn, then I can understand because then it doesn't interrupt the striping, but this is not a self-striping yarn. And the yarn that is used in the example is not self-striping either. So I just don't really get why you would do that extra step, because I feel like you definitely could have knit these. I could have knit these with the heel, like just knit them from start to finish without going back for the heel. I found it kind of annoying to have that extra step at the end. And also it was really hard for me to gauge how long I should knit the foot, because usually when I knit socks, I'm trying them on as I go, and that's how I know when to start decreasing for the toe. But for this, I kind of had to guess. And this sock that is blocked is actually like just a little bit too long. I think I could have done like one less pattern repeat. So maybe there's a way of being able to tell when it's time to stop knitting when you're doing a forethought heel, but I didn't know that. So anyways, I guess I'm just a little bit confused as to what the advantage is of doing an afterthought heel if it's not a self-striping yarn. Anyways, I know how to do it now. It really wasn't that difficult at all. Is this a lunch break appropriate sock? I would say yes, it is. As I mentioned in a previous clip, I did have to write out like a little cheat sheet for myself because the way it's written is just like really easy to get lost. It is like a little bit hard to memorize this pattern. I think midway through my second sock, I finally had it memorized. But for sure in the beginning, I really needed to refer to my pattern all of the time. So that's the only thing where like if you lose your focus, you could mess up. But once you get into the rhythm of it and you start to recognize the pattern emerging and you know what stitches you need to do to keep that pattern going, then it's not too bad. And it's a lot of the same for most of the sock. How long did it take me? It took me 5 days. The first sock took me 3 days and the second sock took me 2 days. And this is the fastest that I have ever knit a sock. I did have these days off, so that probably helped. But yeah, it was a pretty quick knit. I mean, they're slightly larger needles than what I have ever used before. It's 3.25 millimeters instead of the 2.5 that I've used in the past, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. But it's also not a horrendously complicated pattern. Would I knit these again? Yes, I would knit these again. I might use a slightly smaller needle. I found that, well, I kind of sewed it up so you can't see it anymore, but you end up with a lot of eyelets where the increases happen. Like you can see it in the back of the leg here if I put my hand through there. I don't mind it too much there, but there were some areas where it was, especially when I had to decrease at the heel and at the toe, where the eyelets were just like really big. In my second sock, I tried to keep my tension high so it wasn't as bad. But I did, when I went in to weave the ends, go back and just like kind of sew some of those up because they were bothering me. And I wonder if I used a different needle size, that might not have happened. And I also noticed that on the Ravelry page, a lot of other people ran into that same problem. So I don't know if that's a needle thing or if it's a user error thing or if it's a pattern thing. I don't know, but it is something that I noticed. Overall, I would give these socks a 7 out of 10. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked them in the end. There were a couple of things that I didn't quite understand, like the point of the heel and like the little eyelets. And I also think that I maybe didn't choose the easiest yarn to work with. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but anyways, that's on me. And overall, I really like these. I think I'm probably gonna wear these around the house. They are quite chunky, so I don't know that I really want to wear these out. I'm also very curious to see how this yarn will wear because it was felting together even as I was knitting, so I'm sure that these will be thoroughly felted pretty quickly. But for now, I'm gonna go ahead and block this second sock and get on with the next pattern. Okay, so I am really excited because I've finally gotten to one of the patterns in this book that I was really excited about. So this is Branches, and it's a lace pattern. And I've only knit lace once, but I loved it. I love the effect. I love the process of doing it. I think it's just, it's so nice. The pattern is by Amanda Jones, and the yarn I have chosen is Cascade Heritage. The color number is 5686. I don't know what the actual name of it is. Anyways, I've never used this, but I know it's a quite popular one. it's very soft to the touch and it's a very pretty blue color. So I'm excited to try that out. And it's interesting because this sock doesn't really have much of a cuff. You kind of just cast on and start right away. And I also wonder if I'm going to want to knit the leg quite as long as they have it here. I feel like that'll be quite a long leg. However, I've never used more than 2/3 of a 100-gram ball of yarn. So maybe this will be a nice opportunity to actually work my way through an entire ball of yarn. Oh, I wouldn't want to run out though. But anyways, we'll see. I'll decide a little bit later. Anyways, let's go. So I have just completed my first pattern repeat on the branches sock, and I'm having a great time. I really enjoy knitting lace, and this is a little bit more challenging than the only other time that I knit lace, but I'm still really liking it. I feel like lace knitting is less forgiving, a little trickier, but it's like magic. Like you're making all of these yarn overs, you're making all these holes, but then you do a couple more rounds and all of a sudden this pattern emerges. It's truly magical for me. So I started with the German twisted cast on. The pattern says to use any stretchy cast on, including the Norwegian cast on. And I thought, oh, I'll learn how to do the Norwegian cast on. This is all about, learning new things. So then I watched a couple of tutorials and soon discovered that it's the exact same thing as the German twisted cast on. So yeah, that was no problem at all. And I started doing the chart. I really love what they call coin stitches. That's this area here. And it's super easy and they go all the way down the chart. There's a little bit of cabling that I have to do. So I've brought out my cabling needle again. And it's a little bit fiddly because it's only one stitch and you're like sometimes purling off of the cable or knitting through the back loop. So it's like a little bit tricky for me, but I just reviewed the pattern and it looks like it only happens twice right at the top of the leg, and that's it. And then the part of the pattern that has the cabling is done with, if I'm not mistaken, but I think I'm right. So it's a little bit annoying, but you only do it twice and then you're done. But I am now going to put in a lifeline because I don't trust myself to not drop stitches and mess this up. So that's what I'll be doing now. And unfortunately, I'm not going to have as much time to work on this sock anymore as I have for the last few pairs of socks. I have a lot going on with work. So this is going to take me quite a bit longer to finish. I kind of already know that. But in a way, I kind of don't mind because I really like this kind of knitting. So if I can stretch it out longer, all the better. I just finished my first pattern repeat. Found a quiet spot at work and got some knitting done. But rehearsal's about to start, so I gotta stop now. Yay! So here I am knitting later that day on my lunch break. I was pretty excited to have found this new spot at my work where I didn't realize we were allowed to use that space during our lunch breaks until this day. I work as a musician and we rehearse in concert halls, and basically this is just like the audience lounge area, which, when we're rehearsing, there's no audiences, so it's just an empty space. And yeah, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to have all my lunches here from now on. And then somebody who works in the hall joined me, which is fine. I'm cool to talk to strangers. But then he kind of made me feel a little uncomfortable, and nothing terrible happened. But anyways, this was the last time that I had my lunch break in this particular spot. So it was fun while it lasted, all of one day. Almost done the leg. Okay, so we are at the end of day 3 of working on this sock, and this is where I'm at. So I just finished the heel flap and the heel turn, and I did the first setup round, and then the next round I'll start decreasing. And it's a little bit of a different I don't even know if this counts as a reinforced heel. I think it does, because it does have some like slipped stitches in there. But oh my goodness, like on the wrong side, you're purling through the back loop. And not my favorite. But it does create a pretty fabric. And I also did something that was a little bit different to me, which is that when I picked up the stitches in the gusset, it has you knit them right away. And I always just like picked them up and put them on my needle, and I didn't knit them until like the next time I came around. And then the next row you're knitting through the back loop. And I mean, I think it'll be a lot clearer when I have a bit more fabric here, but it looks so tight and neat and nice. And I think I should just do that all the time from now on. I'll see how it looks when it's all done, but so far I'm really liking how they have you pick up the stitches in the gusset. It's like a little bit different than what I'm used to doing, but anyways, I'm realizing that this is the first sock that has the heel turn and gusset, picking up the stitches in the gusset that I'm used to, so felt nice to go back to my sock knitting roots. And now I get to do some just plain knitting at the bottom of the foot, which is always fun because it's mindless. And something else that's really interesting I noticed is that actually when you're decreasing, you end up with more stitches than you started with. So technically the foot will be wider than the leg, which I find particular. Anyways, I have tried it on. It is very snug. It's like almost too small, but we'll see. Hopefully it stretches out a bit with blocking. Normally I have the issue where my socks are too big, not too small. So that's interesting. I'm not totally sure how that ended up happening. Also, a tragedy has occurred. This is my crochet hook. So I've been bringing around my knitting to work in this little bag, which I then stuff in my larger bag. And, I guess in my stuffing, there was a casualty. It's okay. It's still usable. It's looking a little rough. Anyways, I'm going to call it a day for today. And then I'm going to keep working on my sock tomorrow during my lunch break once again. Okay, so I finished the Branches socks, and I finished them kind of a while ago, almost a month ago, I'd say. I didn't do my update right away because, usually I give my final thoughts pretty much immediately after finishing the socks. However, I happened to finish my second sock on the day of my grandma's funeral, and I just didn't really feel like filming a sock update. Hope you understand. Anyways, it's been a few weeks and I'm ready to talk about the socks now. So here they are. And I think this is a fabulous, fabulous pattern. I really like these. I love I love knitting lace. I can knit lace all day long. So just as a reminder, this is the Branches socks, a lace pattern by Amanda Jones. I knit the smaller size, and some of the details of my experience I might not remember as well anymore because it's been a few weeks, but I did write some notes down and I have my whole checklist of all the things that I want to touch on for each pair of socks. So difficulty, I would give this a 2 out of 10. I mean, I really enjoy knitting lace. I found that when I dropped stitches by accident, I was able to correct my errors pretty easily, which was a contrast to the last time I knit lace. I don't know if that has to do with the pattern or if maybe I'm just getting better at knitting lace. But anyways, I thought they would be more difficult than they were for me. I didn't find them very difficult at all. So I'm just giving them a 2 out of 10 in terms of difficulty, so not that hard. And also the heel flap and everything was kind of the standard construction that I'm used to. So that was nice to go back to because all 3 of the first pairs of socks in the books had totally different constructions to what I was used to. So this was the first pair where I felt like I was back in that vanilla sock era that I had started with, and I knew how to build these already. So that made it easier as well. What I learned is that before I start a sock pattern, it is important that I go on the Ravelry page and I see if there is an errata, if there's a mistake in the pattern, because there's a mistake in this pattern, and I only realized, well, I had a suspicion of it, but I didn't actually check and have that confirmed until I was just about finished the first sock. And it's a very small mistake in the pattern. It's honestly difficult for me to tell which one I did correctly and which one I did incorrectly. So here, I'm gonna show you the incorrect one. This is the incorrect one and this is the correct one, and the error is in the cuff. And if you can't tell what the difference is, well, same. I also kind of can't tell. I only know it's there because I knit them, and I did knit the second one correctly. So it's just in this area of the cuff, there's a teeny tiny bit of cabling, and 2 of the cable symbols needed to be switched. So this is the correct way. It's supposed to make like a little X, and on the incorrect way, it ends up making more of like a chevron. But ultimately, it's a pretty subtle change, so I don't feel like my first sock was ruined or anything. But yes, that is the main lesson that I learned, is maybe just check to make sure that there isn't a mistake. And actually, I learned that there is like a page on the Laine website with all of the errata from all of the patterns in this book. There's not like a whole ton, but anyways, I will be checking that page from now on, because this was the first sock that I actually like made a mistake in that technically wasn't my fault. Anyways, now I know that. Are these socks lunch break appropriate? I would say yes. I knit my second sock, a great part of my second sock, on some train rides, and there were lots of distractions and I didn't make any mistakes. So I think that it was a good pattern. I remember eventually I did memorize the lace pattern. It looks quite complicated, but once you've done it like 15 times, you do memorize it. Now that it's a few weeks out, I don't think I would really have it memorized anymore, but I did eventually memorize it, and yeah, I didn't find it to be too difficult to memorize and to not get like too distracted on the train with people around talking to me and stuff. How long did it take me to knit these? I'm not totally sure. I'm almost certain that the first sock took me 3 days, and the second sock I started, and then I got really busy with work, and I started cross-stitching again, and there was a funeral. So I feel like the second sock I probably worked on over the course of like 10 days, but the first sock was about 3 days, and I'm finding that the average sock that has something fancy to it is taking me about 3 days to knit. So, you know, longer than a vanilla sock, but not that long. Would I knit these again? Yes, I would. I would fix the errata in the cuff, and actually, I might even omit that whole part of the cuff anyways, because the cuff pattern looks so similar to the leg and the foot lace pattern that you almost don't really get the effect of a cuff at all. And I was thinking that I think I kind of prefer if my lace pattern doesn't start immediately like this. Like I might have done just like a 1 inch of maybe twisted ribbing instead of that cuff. I'm not totally sure, but that would be the only thing I would change. I might put a different cuff in here, something that would still be elegant and sleek like the rest of the sock, but I'm not sure that I would necessarily do the cuff as it is in the chart. I think, but that's just a personal preference. And then the overall rating that I would give these socks would be an 8 out of 10. I really liked these. As I mentioned, my only critiques were really in the cuff. I will say I'm not crazy about the yarn that I chose. This was Cascade Heritage sock yarn in the color, I think it's called either Blue China or China Blue. And it's like it doesn't seem like it's going to be a very hard wearing yarn, which is too bad because I really like these socks and I feel like they're not going to last that long, or they're not going to look nice for very long. But overall, really liked these socks, and I actually have already started the next pair. So I'm happy to be done with these, moved on from the whole funeral fiasco, and on with pattern number 5 in 52 weeks of socks. Hello. So I'm coming to you now pretty much a year after that last clip, and I'm currently editing all of the footage that I have for the socks that I've made from this book so far. And you know, when I started filming this series, I very naively thought that I would be able to just smash all the footage together and put it into a, 2-hour video. As you can see from the runtime on this video, I pretty quickly learned that that would not be possible. But the good news is that I have finished the first chapter in 52 Weeks of Socks. The book is sort of separated into 4 quarters, 1 to 13, 2 to 26, etc. And I have finished the first quarter of the all of the patterns in here. So I'm currently finishing up editing all of that together, and I hope to have everything for the first 13 pairs of socks posted in the next couple of days. But yeah, it didn't all fit into one video, so it's coming out in 4 different parts. So thank you for watching this video, and I will see you very, very soon with part 2 of what is looking to be a 16-part series.